marked as the elite sort of masculine language. And so women adopted hiragana first, and it actually came to be known as the woman's hand, formerly okay. And as a result, many early works of Japanese poetry, the earliest Japanese diaries, and the earliest Japanese novel, Tale of Genji, and 1000 of the Common Era, which is probably the world's first novel, all of these were written first by women. And in fact, when men wrote in hiragana, sometimes they would adopt female pseudonyms and impersonate women, because they didn't want to be seen as a man using a female form of writing. So it's interesting, a lot of early literature in the Heian period and literacy spread among women more rapidly, for the simple reason that it was easier to use these hiragana characters to represent Japanese as it's actually spoken than it was to try and take all the time to learn Chinese and then figure out how to write something in Japanese, translate it in Chinese, and then write it down. Women learned hiragana and were able to write whatever they felt like writing. Sort of kind of explosion at this time in female literature. And I'll talk about Tale of Genji soon, but first I wanted to talk a little bit about Japanese poetry. I have to work in poetry briefly somewhere. Up to this point in the Heian, classical Chinese poetry had been all the rage. So Japanese men would learn Chinese and they would write Chinese poems, classical poems. And they got quite good at it and wrote some very well-known poems. But they never sounded exactly like a Chinese poem. A friend of mine who was what's the word I'm looking for? I was going to say Caucasian. White, guy like me. He studied Chinese poetry for a long time. He's a professor here at the University of Toronto, and he tried to write classical Chinese poetry for many, many years. He never showed it to anyone who was Chinese because he was embarrassed about it. And after decades of writing Chinese poetry on his own, he finally got the courage to show a Chinese friend one of his poems. He didn't tell him it was his own poem. He said, "What do you think of this Chinese poem I found?" And this Chinese friend read it and said, "It sounds like a Japanese person wrote it." And he thought, well, okay, I'm getting there. Not quite there. So there's a lot of classical Chinese poetry written by Japanese, and actually a lot of classical Chinese poetry written by Korean language as well. But in the Heian, we now have the ability for Japanese writers to write purely using a Japanese script representing Japanese syllables directly. So a sort of native form of Japanese poetry known as the waka became extremely popular. The waka is a longer form upon which haiku is based, and an actual collection full of this waka poetry in hiragana script called Kokinshu was put together in the early 10th century in 905. This was the first official anthology of Japanese poetry purely in hiragana. Of native Japanese poetry. It's much easier to read than the Nanyoshu, that earlier collection, which is a mixture of Chinese and Japanese. And it's actually much more subtle in terms of the poems. And it set the standard for all later classical Japanese poetry. One of the most famous authors in there is Tsurayuko, who edited the collection himself. They wrote a very famous preface to it. Some of his pieces are included and have a translation there. Mount cherries through the drifting mist, faintly seen thus there is a lady of Montfort, all in mourn. And this very sort of suggestive, subtle type of poetry is an example of two main aesthetic principles that started to dominate culture at the Heian court. One is the sense of miyabi, which is, you can translate as courtly refinement. This is particularly in contrast to the provinces, right? So there's very much a sort of urban-rural divide going on. And it's also a class divide, the nobles against the sort of peasant soldiers in the provinces, defining their taste through the sense of courtly refinement. So a preference for the elegant, the restrained, and the suggestive, rather than something that's blatant or stated plainly. And then another very famous and often considered a sort of quintessentially Japanese aesthetic principle is this sense of mono no aware, which is extremely difficult to translate. It's sometimes called a sensitivity to things. I think it's better rendered as it's not very nice rendering, but it's accurate, a capacity to be moved by things. So a sense of when you look at something, particularly something that's old, something that's decaying, that you have an emotional reaction to that, a sort of sympathetic, almost resonant response to your natural surroundings. And that ability to be moved by that is called mono no aware, but it adheres in the objects themselves. So the objects have a kind of aware or pathos to them, but it's only found by a sensitive viewer or reader who's open to that. And so that's what it is. And like this idea of the cherry blossoms, the driftingness, recalling a resonant feeling of missing a woman you love to see faintly in memory. There's a lot of melancholy and sadness behind and that underlying sadness that's tied to the transience of life is the dominant sort of aesthetic, atmospheric tone behind the most famous prose work of the Heian period, the world's first novel that was published in 1000 for the Common Era, and a masterwork of world literature called The Tale of Genji. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it by title, and maybe some of you have read some or all of it. I'm impressed if you read all of it, because it's a pretty big novel, 54 chapters. Very thick, very hard to get through, full of all sorts of characters with all sorts of multiple names. It's kind of like trying to read War and Peace that way. And it was written entirely in the hiragana script by a lady at court named Murasaki Shikibu. And she was a lady-in-waiting at the court, lady-in-waiting on the empress. And it's called Genshi Monogatari in Japanese. Monogatari, which is translated as tale in English, originally meant some sort of fantastic or supernatural tale. It came out of Buddhist tradition of telling miracle stories about the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas. But then it later came to be any sort of story written in prose. And then even later it could be a mixture of true or truth or history and fiction as well. Any sort of narrative, long narrative, is known as Monogatari. And Genji is a reference to the protagonist, the Prince Genji, the shining one. Murasaki Shikibu, Lady Murasaki, was very much wrapped up in court life in the Heian period. There wasn't much for the court women to do, because they weren't allowed to leave the court and go out in public. So once the writing system in hiragana caught on, many of them took to writing, and she's one of the most famous writers of this period. Her lead character, Genji, is the son of the emperor by a low-ranking concubine, and he's depicted as a sort of manly paragon. Here he is presenting a bird he's shot to the, or killed, I should say, to the emperor. So he's depicted as being handsome, witty, a great lover, a poet, a calligrapher, a musician, and a dancer, and having impeccable taste. And without much to do at court, he's quite low-ranking prince. He pursues all sorts of women at court, so most of it is all his love affairs with different women, a lot of romantic intrigue, and a whole lot of poetry going back and forth, waka poetry. This is native form of Japanese poetry goes back and forth. So all these romantic adventures take up the first part of the book, and the second part deals with the sadness and melancholy at court after Genji has died. And it's probably our most extensive sort of intimate document of life at the Heian court. There's another prose work at the time, which is much more fun to read, written by another woman at court, sort of a rival of Lady Murasaki, another lady in waiting named Sei Shonobon. And her book is a collection of more like random thoughts and observations, and it's called the Pillow Book. Presumably because she kept it by her pillow in case she had a sudden thought and wanted to write it down. Another anecdote says that she asked for a bunch of scrap paper. Were actually books from China that the court didn't need anymore. She asked the empress to use that scrap paper as a pillow. I'm not sure why. And then decided to use all that paper to write her own thoughts down in a sort of diary form. She's pictured in the center here. It's definitely not a book about women or water or pathos of things, or death, or melancholy, or transience of love and romance. It's more a book full of all sorts of witty and wry observations by a woman who's not afraid to speak her mind and defend people. She speaks about her own experience of writing this book. She says near the end of it, "It is getting so dark that I can scarcely go on writing, and my brush is all worn out. Yet I should like to add a few things before I end. I wrote these notes at home when I had a good deal of time to myself and thought no one would notice what I was doing. Everything that I have been and felt is included. Since much of it might appear malicious and even harmful to other people, I was careful to keep my book hidden. But now it's become public, which is the last thing I expected." So it purports to be a private sort of diary in which she's talking about her real feelings, but it became popular and then she wrote a sort of postface to it, and it was circulated with that. And then she says things like, Ben at court, a man who has nothing in particular to recommend and discusses all sorts of subjects at random as if he knew everything. Or she once said about Buddhist preachers, a preacher ought to be good looking. For if we are properly to understand his worthy sentiments, we must keep our eyes on him when he speaks. Should we look away, we may forget to listen. Accordingly, an ugly preacher may well be the source of sin. And it's the early example of a very popular genre in Japanese literature called zuihitsu, or running brush, sort of a kind of random collection of thoughts. The actual long novel, like Elegante, is quite rare. It's more this episodic writing, which is more popular. All sorts of other literary genres came out of the Han court. The diaries, Nikki, the poem tales, the Usa Monogatari, historical tales, Rekishi Monogatari. You don't have to know all these, but it's just good to know that all this was going on in court at the time. Two historical tales were written in praise of the Fujiwara clan. Michinaga, the guy I showed you before. But it was soon after Michinaga died in 1027 that the Fujiwara clan began to fragment and fighting broke out. And the Han court started to go into decline. As the centralized government, which was, as I said, very insular and divorced from provinces, once the Fujiwara clan started to lose its power and the court started to fall apart, there was a sort of simultaneous rise of a more powerful warrior class in the provinces, who came to be known as bushi, or later samurai. So where did these guys come from? So the aristocracy at the court in the Han were living off the taxes coming in from the provinces. But as I said, they never actually visited the provinces. They would deputize people to run the provinces for them, and the aristocrats would just stay at court. They didn't think there was anything interesting happening inside the court. But at the same time, out in the provinces, there had been a sort of large standing army that had been brought into existence, that had been raised during the Taika reforms in the Nara period to supposedly protect Japan from foreign aggression. And then when Japan realized it wasn't going to be attacked by China, they kind of let that army, they sort of defunded it, stopped supporting it. So all these sort of military trained men were wandering around with nothing to do. So they soon started coalescing around local leaders in the provinces, and they became kind of local police forces that enforced law and order in the land, because the actual direct control of the Han court didn't extend much beyond Kyoto itself. And this kind of infantry that was sort of a ragtag, kind of loosely organized infantry in the provinces, started to be led by an elite class of warriors who were on horseback and hunted with bow. So it was kind of an infantry on foot with this kind of officer class of these mounted archers. By the way, they used to use crossbows in Japan because they're easier to use, but they're very difficult to manufacture, and so they stopped manufacturing them. And then the longbow became popular, which is much easier to manufacture, but it's very difficult to use. So particularly to shoot a bow and arrow from horseback is exceedingly difficult. So this kind of elite class of warriors arose that were able to do this. The word samurai originally meant, if you know Chinese, you can see this character here, originally just meant a servant or an attendant, and actually referred to household servants. But then it started to be used in the Han period to refer to household guards, sort of like bodyguards or private armies that nobility started to gather around themselves. And they would draw these warriors from this elite, rural elite warriors, these military gentlemen, the bushi. They weren't known as military gentlemen or bushi until about the 12th century. And so the samurai, what we think of as the samurai today, that's the kind of classic popular culture image of the samurai there, evolved over many centuries. So he evolved from a kind of relatively rustic warrior farmer, really, into this hereditary elite samurai class over the course of centuries, and finally reached a form which we might recognize in this painting here, not until about the 16th century. So it took a while for this to happen. And in fact, the earliest samurai, as pictured here, had nothing to do with swords. It was horse-mounted archers using bow and arrow, and then later the whole cult of the samurai sword was added on top of that. The way of the warrior, the bushido, is actually the way of the bow and the horse. And then combat between these military elites, the samurai became highly ritualized. Although it was bloody in the end, you often beheaded your enemy, and your prestige was based on how many enemy heads you taken. Until about the 11th century, these warriors were a relatively unstable group, but they started gradually coalescing around two major families. By this time, the Japanese imperial family had grown very large, about 700 members just in the noble class alone, the highest noble class. And the court, which was losing revenues from the provinces, did not have enough money to support such a large imperial family. So they started kind of exiling the junior branches of the family, telling them to go live elsewhere. And so two of these junior branches of the family, named Taira and Minamoto, went to the provinces and had a lot of status because they were nobles. But yet they lived in the provinces. And so they started gathering these elite warriors to their side. And so kind of two armed factions, the Taira clan and the Minamoto clan, started to rise in the countryside, gathering these samurai warriors around them. In the meantime, in the Heian court, the Fujiwara clan, which had controlled the emperor for centuries, was now being challenged by emperors themselves, actually, in something called the rule of retired emperors, which is a kind of innovative way of ruling. There was a key mistake. I remember there was lots of intrigue going on at court to keep the Fujiwara clan in power as the source of bribes for the emperors. They made a mistake of, I won't go into all the details of it, but it ended up that an emperor took the throne who was not from the Fujiwara clan, did not have a Fujiwara mother. And he immediately wanted to do things his own way. And so he acquired advisors from the Minamoto clan, actually outside of the capital, rather than using the Fujiwara clan. And he tried to place his supporters in posts throughout the empire. And then he retired and set up his own son as emperor. This happened in 1086. And then this retired emperor actually ran Japan from behind the throne. So once again, the emperor is not the source of real power. The emperor is only the source of symbolic power. But the real power now is not a regent clan like the Fujiwara clan, married into the imperial line, but the real power now is the retired emperor, the father of the emperor is on the throne. And so the emperor himself is still not a threat because he doesn't have the real power. All the machinations, the court intrigue go on around the throne that don't threaten the throne itself. But now the source of power is the retired emperor. And once this first emperor did this, it set up a whole sort of precedent, which lasted from 1086 to 1180 of these retired emperors. There were actually 10 emperors sitting on the throne, but really only 3 retired emperors were running things during the time. So while that was going on, you had this increasingly estranged provinces being ruled by this warrior class military men. And the kind of two worlds grew up of this courtly refined culture versus this warrior culture in the provinces. And these warriors who were aligning themselves to the Taira clan and the Minamoto clan increasingly tried to exert control over the court. And this sort of lawlessness started to take hold of the land. There was a lot of piracy and a lot of warfare in this period. And I have to move things along, so I'm going to skip over this slide quickly. But I was going to make an aside that during this sort of lawless period of a lot of violence and factional struggles, Pure Land Buddhism became very popular because it had an apocalyptic vision that Buddhist law was coming to its end right in this period, that the end of the world was nigh and you had to be saved by the Amitabha Buddha or Amida Butsu, the Japanese, and brought to a paradise of Pure Land in order to escape the coming apocalypse. And the handy thing was all you had to do was say Namu Amida Butsu over and over again. If you could, thousands of times a day. And if you were constantly saying that, if that was on your lips the moment you died, then the Amida Buddha himself would come down from the skies and whisk you into the Pure Land. So it became a very, very popular form of business. The Fujiwara clan itself built this very famous Pure Land temple, Gyodori, called the Phoenix Hall. Ironically, this is where the biggest war of the period broke out, was at this temple, called the Genpei War. This is important because this is the war that signaled the transition from the Heian period of imperial rule to the Kamakura period of military rule. And the war, as you're probably not surprised, broke out between these two clans that had been gathering military men around themselves, the Taira clan and the Minamoto clan. So the Fujiwara, through their own missteps, had lost power to these retired emperors, so there was a bit of a power vacuum in Heian at the time, and so the Taira clan is the one that moved in and took things over at the court, and they moved to kill the senior members of the Minamoto clan. And they actually managed to kill the oldest male member of the Minamoto clan, but they made the mistake of letting two of his sons escape. There are different stories of why they did that. But one of them went east, away from Kyoto, to modern-day Tokyo area, Kamakura area, and established his base there and divided his time there. And the Taira clan tried to consolidate its control of the court back in Kyoto. And they actually did sort of lead to a period of some stability. It even opened up trade missions with China again, with Song China. And during this period, they brought back all sorts of books from China on literature, medicine, and geography, Chinese paintings, which became very popular in the period, Chinese ceramics, and so forth, and spurred on libraries and scholarship in Japan. But it didn't last too long. There was another imperial prince who felt that the Taira clan wasn't allowing him to take succession of the throne because they had their own candidate they wanted on the throne, started to rebel. And he was quickly killed by the Taira clan, but not before he put out a call for help to the Minamoto clan over in Kamakura in modern-day Tokyo. And so they started to raise a huge army and to come battle against the Taira. And so the stage was set for this war, the Genpei War. Just so geographically you can figure out what's going on here. The Taira are here in Kyoto, and they killed most of the Minamoto, and one of the Minamoto sons got away and established his base here. And so Japan now has a kind of western power base in Kyoto with the Taira clan at court, and a growing eastern power base in the Kamakura, Tokyo region with the Minamoto clan through military means. So they declared war against one another. That should be 1180, sorry, not 1118. They declared war against each other, but for the first 3 years they didn't actually fight. It's a kind of a weird sort of shadow war where they're always, trash talking back and forth, but they didn't actually fight one another. There's actually a very famous story of a Taira war party that left Kyoto and tried to go to the Kanto region to do some reconnaissance on what the Minamoto were doing. And halfway there, they heard some strange birds in the middle of the night they'd never heard before and got freaked out and they ran away and went home. And they never actually had a battle until about 1183, when Minamoto got tired of waiting and came and attacked the capital. And they quickly ousted the Taira clan out of the capital. In that battle is called the Genpei War. Genpei is sort of the Chinese pronunciation of Taira and Minamoto when you write out the Chinese characters for them. And it's recounted in probably the most famous historical novel of Japanese literature, The Tale of Heike. This is an illustration on the screen taken from that tale. It has a very famous opening. The sound of the bell of the Gion temple holds the impermanence of all things, and the hue of the salad tree's blossoms reveals the truth that those who flourish must fade. The proud ones do not last forever, but are like the dream of a spring night. Even the mighty will perish, just like dust before the wind. It's sort of split its opening to a tale of war and intrigue. For a while, it looked like the country of Japan, if you want to call it a country at that point, might actually even be split into two between the Taira in the west and the Minamoto in the east, but the Minamoto eventually were able to conquer the Taira and take Kyoto back. The remarkable thing, though, is that the head of the Minamoto clan, named Yoritomo, pictured here, he never left Kamakura, even in the battles against the Taira clan, even the battles to retake Kyoto. He didn't go on them himself, he was sent as general. And after they were successful in retaking Kyoto, he didn't move to Kyoto, and he didn't move the imperial family to Kamakura. He just said, okay, imperial family, you stay in Kyoto, and I'm going to stay here in Kamakura, and we'll divide things up. So theoretically, well, in practice, there was a split in power. Right? So the imperial court, which was a symbolic representation of power, remained at Kyoto, remained with the imperial family on the throne, while real sort of political and military power, and increasingly economic power, shifted away from Kyoto towards Kamakura in the east, under the rule of Minamoto Yoritomo. He established a military headquarters there, known as the Bakufu. Literally means the tent government, right? Because the military, when they were in the field, they would set up tents as their headquarters, but they actually built a real headquarters. They called it the Bakufu. And this ushered in the era of the Kamakura period, which went from 1185 to 1333. And this is the first time where a ruler, now military ruler, this is not the emperor, is called a shogun, who is separate from the emperor. So the official title that Yoritomo received this title directly from the emperor in Kyoto is the Great General Pacifying the Barbarians, the Sei Tai Shogun. This was the title that the Chinese emperors used to give to Japanese emperors. And now here, a Japanese emperor was acting like a Chinese emperor and giving this title to one of his generals, who took on the short version of it, called himself shogun. And so the shogun, Yoritomo, was in the east, in Kamakura. The emperor remained in the west, in Kyoto, and they both sort of were running Japan that way. One a symbolic leader, and one the actual military and political leader. In fact, Yoritomo himself never claimed to rule all of Japan. He never made that claim because he didn't want to appear as a rebel. So he actually only directly ruled over his own military vassals, his warriors, his samurai. But he did reserve the right to appoint his samurai to estates throughout Japan as stewards of those estates. So that's how he effected sort of political control over the entire country, is by sending his representatives throughout it. But he never claimed to rule Japan directly. It was kind of a legalistic distinction, I guess. And so the imperial line was preserved unbroken at this time. But this is now what we call a shift from an age of emperors to age of shoguns, because the real power now lies in Kamakura and the later Morimachi, the Tokugawa, Bakufu, are the real governments, while the emperors are now just figureheads and no longer actually running things. There was a continuing belief in this period that Japan had somehow entered an age of decline because the emperor was no longer really in control. These sort of coarse warriors were now in control. And so this idea that there was this age of decline and the end of Buddhist law still was very popular. Huge statues. There's a very famous bronze statue of the Buddha that's built during the Kamakura period in Kamakura. Rose up. New sects of Buddhism rose up. A very important one known as Nichiren Buddhism appeared at this time, which is actually the only Japanese form of Buddhism which is purely Japanese and has no tie whatsoever to any Chinese school of Buddhism. I think I put one of the readings in your source book readings from Nichiren, the major figure of that school of Buddhism. It was very nationalistic as well. Saw sort of the Japanese nation define Buddhist terms against all other nations. And in fact, Nichiren himself said he was the new Buddha, the new historical Buddha. This is important to start that. He's a bit of a megalomaniac. And then the other sort of very important form of Buddhism at the time was Zen Buddhism. And Zen Buddhism, during this period, the Kamakura period, takes on a kind of a sort of form of, it's used as a cultural marker for the Bakufu through the shogun elite, shogunate, as an alternate culture with which to define themselves against the court culture in Kyoto. And so this sort of very purposeful use of Zen to shape all these forms of Japanese culture is where many sort of cliched ideas we have about Japanese culture come from. And they were actually made as markers, as cultural markers, purposely by the shogunate in Kamakura to distinguish themselves as being refined against the court culture. Because they were always considered as coarse warriors in the East, where the Western nobility were considered to be sophisticated. And so Zen Buddhism became a way for these sort of coarse warriors in the East to elevate themselves culturally. So they adopted tapes for poetry, rock gardens, the tea ceremony, this monochromatic painting of Sumie comes out of Song Dynasty, China, no drama, certain types of architecture, showing rooms, so forth, are all influenced this purposeful program of sophisticated culture through Zen Buddhism. At the core of the Zen Buddhist sect, which comes from Chan Buddhism in China, is that true insight into the illusionary nature of samsara, so reaching enlightenment, Sappodi as it's known in Japanese, is not derived from studying any sort of scriptures or chanting any sort of names as the Pure Land Buddhists believe, nor conducting elaborate rituals like the Shingon Buddhists believe, nor any sort of worship of a script or a sutra, I should say, but from a direct apprehension of truth, right? Through your own experience and through your own heart and mind. And some of the famous sort of aspects of Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, comes out of a famous sect called the Rinzai sect, who preached, there were two major schools of Zen Buddhism. One preached that it was a gradual process of enlightenment, that you had to go through discipline of meditation and work towards enlightenment, eventually you would reach it. And the other sect, the Rinzai sect, believed that it was sudden, that it just happened to you at any moment, even when you're least prepared for it. And that could come from just a sudden shock, like a slap in the face from your master, or verbally shocks such as paradoxes and riddles that are known as koan became very popular. There are many famous koans. This is the most famous one, of course, is what is the sound of one hand clapping. And part system says it's this. You can hear that. But the other famous one is, if you meet the Buddha on the road, you should kill him. And the other ones don't make any sense whatsoever. I dug up one here. In what way do my feet resemble the feet of a donkey? The answer is, when the heron stands in the snow, its color is not the same. So if you understand that, I suppose you're enlightened. But the idea is that it's supposed to shock your conventional way of thinking into seeing the world in a different way. So Zen Buddhism became a very popular theme with poetry and painting, as well as architecture. When Minamoto Yoritomo, the first shogun, died in 1199, his widow became the real power, and is often called the nun shogun, which is the Buddha's nun. And she ensured that her own clan, the Hojo clan, would stay in control of the shogun. So very much the same way that the Fujiwara clan married themselves into the imperial line in order to maintain control of the emperor, the Hojo clan married themselves into the shogun line in order to become regents of the shogun. So that very sort of Japanese mode of political rule was replicated in the shogun, the military side, as well as the imperial side with the emperors. But an emperor did try to challenge the Hojo and get them out of power, and they quickly put down this emperor. They grabbed more land for themselves, they appointed many military officers throughout the country, and even exerted more control over the court back in Kyoto. So under the Hojo clan, the Kamakura shogunate grew even more powerful. And they ruled Japan for most of the 13th century. And this is when the samurai really started to rise in the force as well. The Hojo clan even opened up rule of Japan to what was called a council of state, which was attended by all the sort of local chieftains and of the great samurai clan. And they were putting actually Japanese government on a sort of stable footing and extending its influence over the entire island in a way that hadn't even been accomplished by any of the imperial courts beforehand. So you can see here the major shift. I go back to this timeline here. Is we're moving from Heian, which is this age of centralized civilian aristocratic rule, right? So once again, these terms of civilian versus military come up. Wen or Wu, or Bun or Wu in Japanese. So on the one hand, you have this sort of centralized civilian aristocratic rule in the Heian period. And then once you have a transition to Kamakura, you have a transition now to this sort of decentralized military rule in the age of shogun, which becomes increasingly centralized, but runs in parallel to the sort of symbolic power of the court. Although the court itself never was directly powerful, because they were usually, the emperors were controlled by some sort of regent clan. So we have a split of symbolic power between the civilian aristocratic court at Kyoto and now the military power at Bakufu in Kamakura. And this model is adopted later in the Muromachi period, which we'll talk about, and then the Tokugawa period, a very long period, which brings Japan right up into the 19th century. So almost 700 years of rule under this shogun Bakufu government, with the emperor purely being a symbolic figurehead. During this time, by the way, the court actually became poorer and more destitute, to the point where they weren't even able to put on the rituals they were supposed to put on because they couldn't afford all the proper decorations and food and clothing and so forth. And it ended up finally, with the Meiji Restoration in 1868, was an explicit restoration of imperial power and a concentration of political and military power back into the hands of the emperor, as with the end of the military rule of the Bakufu. And this is being said, of course, this is the time when Japan entered the counter with modernity, and when Japan started playing a more and more important role in the East Asian sphere in general. And this concentration of military and political power back in the hands of the emperor is one factor which has been identified as leading to the rise of Japanese imperialism in East Asia in the modern period. But even as the Kamakura period was putting the Japanese government back on stable footing, the Mongols were now sweeping across Central Asia, China, and Korea, and then they eventually came to threaten the island of Japan itself to attempted naval invasion of Japan. So next week what I'm going to talk about is Koryo, Korea, and then the rise of the Mongols, and then I'll talk about the Mongolian invasion of China, Korea, and the attempted invasion of Japan together as a unit. I guess I edited myself too drastically because it's only 2:47, but enjoy your free time.